Hello, I'm Dr. Rob Scott, president of Life University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this podcast. It's a very special one for us for a couple of reasons. First is that this weekend we're celebrating our LIFE Vision Extravaganza 2022. We have about 1,500 docs on campus returning to visit with friends and to get continuing education and reconnect with their family and friends here at Life University. The other reason that's really special to me is we have a very special guest with us this weekend. We are excited to announce that we are launching an inaugural lecture series tomorrow at our plenary in honor of this gentleman who's with us today. So I wanted to take this opportunity while he's with us on our campus for our celebrations to just have a casual conversation with somebody who frankly needs no introduction in our profession because he is literally one of the few people who you can call an icon, and that's Dr. Gerard Clum. Jerry, it is awesome to have you with us here on Life's campus.
It's a pleasure to be back and a pleasure to be with you and thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, it's been a few years since you've been able to come back on campus with COVID and issues and things, so it's wonderful that you're able to join us.
Yeah.
I feel compelled because it's such a formal thing that, tomorrow at our celebrations, we're going to, do the official announcement. But I think people who might not know you probably deserve just a glimpse into your contribution to this profession and certainly Life University. So, you are a 73 graduate of Palmer.
Correct.
You are the one of the first, if not the first, faculty member.
One of the original
three faculty members here at Life University.
Yes.
In the founding years of this, you have subsequently in 81, you were charged by Dr. Williams to go out to California and be the first president of Life West.
Yep.
And you served in that capacity for 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
And I'm not too sure how many other sitting presidents have been in that round, but that's probably one of the longest sitting college presidents.
It's near the top five.
Near the top five.
In history, yeah.
So a remarkable run there, but that ended in 2011.
Correct.
And then you've come back to Life University in that capacity, assisting the president's office, and at the time Dr. Riekman, and now me and the board of trustees here for over 10 years now, back in your home.
Hard to believe.
And through all those years, you've served in every position in the profession almost. It's easier to check off the ones probably that you haven't served. The board of directors or director of ICA. You've been ACC, the Association of Chiropractic Colleges. You've been on the board for WFC. You are serving as the executive director of the Rubicon Group, the collection of vitalistic schools, Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, and of course the IHPC, the Integrative Health Policy Consortium, which is the co-sponsor for this announcement that we have, which is the Gerard Clum Lasting Purpose Legacy Lectureship, which we're holding the inaugural one tomorrow. So I know I've missed a few things in there, and maybe as we chat, you can throw some more jewels into that. But let's start with this weekend. This is a pretty special event that IHPC, through your service on that board for all these years, has passed a resolution to recognize you in literally perpetuity moving forward in Life University to be the host of that lectureship. It's got to feel good.
It's remarkably humbling, and it does feel great, and it's it's hard to absorb. That kind of a thing. You went through the history of my involvement from the early days and up through the moment, and so much of it is just kind of rolled on from day to day and just happened. I can't say that I planned much of my life. I can't say that I had any kind of great vision for what I wanted to do. I was on board from the very beginning with what Dr. Williams articulated in terms of lasting purpose, in terms of the vision of this institution and what it hoped to do back from the very first day. And nothing's changed other than it's gotten deeper, it's gotten richer, it's gotten stronger. Regardless of the setting and the environment that I've had the good fortune to participate in, it has just been a joy, and I can't be more grateful, couldn't be more grateful than I am for all the opportunities I've had, and then to be acknowledged and recognized as you and IHPC have in this way is just icing on the cake. It's just wonderful.
Well, it's well-deserved. It's funny when you look at your path to where you are in your career right now and how things just happen almost by chance, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So I know in those days when you showed up here in '74, I believe.
Yep.
Coming with Sid to start Life University. Those stories. I mean, your experience with chiropractic that got you into Palmer isn't your traditional chiropractic story.
No back pain or neck pain.
Yeah, exactly. It's the way we used to emphasize things.
Yeah.
So, are you willing to share a little bit?
By all means. When I was about 12 years old, I fell several times and wound up with fractures. I had a boxer's fracture in both first metacarpal phalangeal articulations in different times, and I broke my ankle in another. And the orthopedist is setting the third of the fractures, and as a joke, I was talking to my dad while he's setting the fracture. He says, "You need to get this boy's eyes checked." I mean, it was a big joke, and they did. And lo and behold, I had lost a very significant part of my vision. And I wasn't just a 12-year-old klutz. I probably was that, but on top of it, I couldn't see much as well, which made getting around a little bit more difficult, and hence the falls. But that started us down a path that ultimately took us to New York City, to Cleveland, to the Cleveland Clinics, and we lived in Buffalo at the time. The diagnosis that came back was bilateral optic atrophy. It had an idiopathic origin, and a long-term prognosis was ultimate blindness. And my parents were just, been hit in the head with a 2x4. And my father had a 10th grade education. He was a smart man, but he just didn't have a grasp of what any of that meant. Mm-hmm. The summer of 1964, we had gone to Cleveland. It's a 4th of July weekend, and I had a procedure done called a pneumoencephalogram. And a pneumo, they put you in a chair, anesthetize you, do a lumbar puncture, drain the cerebrospinal fluid, replace the cerebrospinal fluid with air. Now take an X-ray because you've got contrast between the water density and air density of the ventricles. Take the air out and put the fluid back in, and you wake up a day later convinced your brain is being sucked through the floor of your skull because it's floating, not floating. And it's a brutal test, brutal. And the conclusion was that I didn't have cancer, I didn't have a tumor, I didn't have multiple sclerosis, and that it was this idiopathic condition they had. And get into Braille school was the advice my parents were given. And my dad had been seeing a chiropractor. We had a summer home in southern Ontario, a little town called Port Colborne. My dad had been seeing a chiropractor for some low back problems that he had all of his life. And I happened to go in with him after we came back from Cleveland, and I had missed several appointments because they were with me. And the chiropractor said, "Where you been? What's going on?" And my dad explained to him, and as clear as I'm sitting here today, I can be in that waiting room. I'm 12 years old. It's a second-story office over Pagetto's Meat Market on Clarence Street in Port Colborne. Dr. Kassan is sitting there, got his glasses on his forehead like this, got a Boyd's pathology, a Gray's anatomy, and a guidance physiology, and he's explaining to my dad what bilateral optic atrophy of idiopathic origin meant. And I'm a 12-year-old kid, and I'm sitting there, and my father was my hero. And I remember sitting there watching, you could just see it, the pain, the suffering, the agony of not knowing what the hell was going on drained from my father's face. And before the chiropractor ever put his hands on me, one of the greatest gifts that I ever got from the profession was seeing my father relieved of that load, that burden. And at the end of the conversation, Dr. Kassan looked at my dad and said, "Don, I don't know if I could help the boy. Guarantee I wouldn't hurt him. and I'd love the chance to try. And I got my first adjustment that night. 2 months later, September, we're back and home in the States, getting ready to go back to school and go see the ophthalmologist. And the ophthalmologist got his scope. This is the honest truth. I'm not embellishing this one bit. Camel cigarette in one hand, ophthalmoscope in the other hand, big bushy mustache, and he leans in, and it's got this. All I can smell is the cigarette
smoke.
Okay, and he leans in. He says, "Excuse the language." He said, "This is a goddamn miracle." And he said, "What'd you do to this boy?" And my father said, "We took him to a chiropractor." He didn't move, he didn't wiggle, he didn't shake, he didn't lose a beat. He said, "I wouldn't take my dog to a chiropractor." And I'm 12 years old, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, the people you sent me to damn near killed me.
Mm-hmm.
The people that my dad took me to helped me. You think it's a miracle, but you wouldn't go there. And at 12 years old, sitting in the ophthalmologist's chair, I decided to be a chiropractor.
I bet.
That was it. And my mother was in a panic, because nobody in their right minds decides they want to be anything at 12 years old and locks in. And I had no high school teenager angst about what I was going to do or anything. I was going to be a chiropractor, period. And locked into that, and continued, obviously, my relationship with Dr. Kassan, and he was my mentor throughout all the rest of his life. And in fact, my son is Donald Cameron Clum. Cameron is a chiropractor, and Donald was my father.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandson is Cameron Clum. And so this fellow's had multiple generations of influence, two of which he's never met,
mm-hmm.
you know, but changed my life, you know, that day.
It sure did.
And it gave me a career, gave me my eyesight. I didn't tell you the story that when we went back to the ophthalmologist, my vision prior to that time was correctable to 20/90. And at the end of that summer, it was correctable to 20/40. So that really, that's where it all started.
Wow.
And it just,
powerful words, though, aren't they? I don't know if it can help, but I'm pretty sure it won't hurt.
That's right.
It's really as simple as that.
And I'd love the chance to try. You know,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and he was such a nice man on top of it all.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just you know, if you ask me to say, and we're doing a meditation, you say go to the safest place you could think of or something like that, it would be laying on Dr. Kassan's table on my back with my head and neck in his hands. Mm. And I'm telling you, no criticism to my mom or my dad or anybody else. I was just telling you that was that feeling. My goal as a chiropractor, as a young chiropractor, was if you could tell me that my hands felt on your neck the way his hands felt on mine, I'd stop.
Right.
Because it just can't get any better than that. I mean, I'm done, you know.
And, you know, stories like that, first of all, I love the geographical significance of Port Colborne, Ontario, being just a little south of Port Perry, where D.D. Palmer was born, right? So it's literally on the map beside each other.
That's right.
The challenge we have with that, I mean, it's a remarkable story. We hear a lot of those kinds of stories nowadays in our profession. We'd be challenged with where's the evidence to support those sorts of things, which is a very legitimate question and an obligation on behalf of the profession to start to do those sorts of things.
That's right.
But you obviously 12 years old, impactful. I want to be a chiropractor right away. You end up at Palmer College. How old were you when you went to Palmer?
Oh, straight out of high school.
So that would have been 18 years old.
18, yeah.
Straight in Davenport, Iowa.
Yep.
And then you went through your studies there. There were a lot of people who are also pretty significant folks in our profession who were in those Palmer classes back in those days.
Yes. Dr. Riekman was a little bit, about 6 months ahead of me, I think. Maybe might have been a year.
Yeah.
But we were certainly aware of each other, and we didn't travel in exactly the same circles back then, but we were close. But there was just, I think back of Dr. Williams's time, where the cadre of people that he was involved with, from Dr. Gold to Dr. Pierce and so on, and his time, and then the cadre of people that were in my era, Dr. Riekman and so on, and in other parts of the profession, Dr. Yoakum is on the program here this weekend, And he was at the same point in his career at National and under the tutelage of Dr. Jancy, and I was under the guidance of Sid, and it was great time. It was a great era.
Yeah. So you graduate from Palmer. How'd you end up here? I mean, what was the connection?
I graduated in December 1973 and began practice in Davenport in January of 1974, and was a young faculty member, junior faculty member at Palmer at the time. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I had eyes on South Carolina, and had gotten a South Carolina license just as early as I could. And I was starting to look at that. And then the discussion about Life Chiropractic College really started to come to a head. And then in the summer of 1974, there was the DE meeting that Dr. Williams hosted, and there was an announcement and a fundraiser at that point. And I saw Dr. Williams afterwards and said, I'm on the faculty at Palmer. I said, I don't know if you have any needs or if things are covered, but if you can use my help, call me. And wasn't long before we were in touch with one another. And Kathy and I we met earlier that year in '74, and we were married on November 2nd. I sold my practice on December 1st, and on January 10th, we were living in Marietta, Georgia. Marietta, Georgia, yeah.
That is fun.
Yeah.
So you come out of Davenport, you've got lightning bolts coming out of the piezoforms, you've got a great chiropractic story. Everybody at Life in that core group of faculty must have been pretty much on fire, I would think.
Oh, it really was lightning in a bottle moment.
Yeah.
It really when I think back now, and I don't think I'm romanticizing about it, and I don't think I'm making more out of it than it was, but I can't imagine a collection of people and opportunities aligning like they did for us at that time that we had to work with.
Right. And then during that period of time when you're here, of course, the opportunity to touch all the students that are coming through this place. You're one of these guys in this profession who, most people know, regardless of where they've graduated from, but certainly anybody who came through the halls of Life University during that period of time speaks and thinks of you in a remarkably fond manner. So that must have been a pretty gratifying time for you in the classroom.
It was. Some of that's kind of old Army stuff. When you're there, it's not necessarily so much fun, but looking back on it, it was a good old days.
Yeah, exactly.
So I appreciate that, and I appreciate there's some of the folks I bumped into this weekend that go back to that time, and there was some moaning and groaning and griping and complaining along the way, but in the final analysis, we all got out of it a great deal, and we all invested a great deal as well. But in those days, literally, Tuesdays was my day that the student body would line up if they wanted an adjustment, and they'd just come through my office and we'd adjust everybody.
The student clinic was the office.
Thursday was Charlie Kolb's day.
Yeah.
And if you needed to be adjusted another time, well, you had to go to somebody's office, And but so I mean, to begin in those days where there's 3 people on the faculty. Ron Watkins was dean, and Charlie Kolb, and myself, and the initial 18 students that we had. I mean, we invested every ounce of our blood, sweat, toil, and tears into them. And we knew what we wanted them to be and what we wanted them to get out of this process. And that there was a hell of a lot of water to go under that dam over that dam between here and there. But we knew what we wanted to do, and we worked very hard to make sure they got what we wanted them to get in that regard. And I look back on that group, and there was a lot of criticism of Life. There was a lot of criticism of Sid, and there was questions about quality and so on. And they kicked butt when it came to national board time. And this was prior to the time that grades were reported and publicly known and all that kind of thing. And so we were very gratified by that. And then some of them have gone on to be take very significant positions in the profession and make great contributions.
Yeah.
And I'm honored and humbled to even think about the good fortune of being positioned as I was in those days.
And the impact.
Yeah.
So 81 rolls along, well, maybe 80 at the time.
Yeah.
And Sid comes and starts talking about California and expanding to the west. And
Yeah.
how'd you end up on that bus stop bench
Yeah.
heading out to California?
Well, two upper cervical chiropractors, George Wentland and George Anderson, predominantly George Anderson, founded Pacific States Chiropractic College in San Francisco area, Hayward, California, East Bay. And they were wonderful fellows. And they didn't have a clue what they'd gotten into. And they didn't have any idea how deep the water was, nor how shark infested it was.
Yeah.
And Pacific States was in significant trouble. And they reached out to me and inquired as to whether I'd come out for an interview to be president of Pacific States. And Kathy and I went out and we sat for the interview and was ultimately offered the job, and I took it. And I talked with Sid about it as soon as I had the conversations with George Anderson. And Sid was gracious. And I didn't know whether I was going to get my head bitten off or different body parts handed back to me. But he was a perfect gentleman about it and wished me well and so on. And what could I do to help, and on and on and on. And I went back home, and Kathy and I talked, and I said, they don't need me. They need Sid. I can put the spots on the paper. I can, line up the courses. I can do that stuff. But what they really need is somebody like Sid to help out. So I called George and George Anderson and said, I'm sorry, but I'm backing out. And he was pretty upset because they were about ready to make an announcement and so on. And my timing was good in that they hadn't made the announcement, and it was bad because they were backed up against the wall. And he said, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? He didn't say it that way. He said, what am I supposed to do? And I said, I would talk to Sid. And he said, well, what about? And I said, well, talk to him and see what he can do for you. I said, you don't need Gerard Clum. You need somebody with a base of support in the profession. You need somebody, with the strength and the depth that he has that I don't have for this institution. Well, they entered into conversation, and the long and the short of it was that they agreed that there would be an affiliation between the two. Pacific States would become Life Chiropractic College West, and that part of the deal was that I would be the first president of Life West. So at the time, which was at the corner of Windy Hill Road and what's 75 now, right in that area, there was a North Side Airport Express, which was the way you got back and forth to the airport. And I remember Sid meeting me at the Airport Express bus as I was ready to go to California. Kathy and the kids, we had 3 children at the time, and they were still here and going to be here for a number of months. But I was getting on the bus to go, and Sid reached up off his lapel and gave me his LP pin, and he said, one thing you got to remember above everything else. And I said, what's that, Doc? He said, it's just a game. He said, it's just a game. He said, go have fun, play as hard as you can, but don't ever forget, it's just a game. I said, okay, I think I understand what you mean. I don't know. And got on the bus and off to California I went. And Kathy and the kids followed a few months later, which turned out to be very, very good timing because the initial few months there needed my attention 24/7.
Yeah.
And, dealing with kids and a family, it just, I hesitate to say it was a distraction, but it would have been, it would have taken time away that the institution needed at that moment. So Kathy and the kids showed up, and that was 40 years ago.
40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So through that time, I mean, obviously campuses moved during that period of time. You had the opportunity to move the campus to Hayward. And what do you look back on that 30 years of your presidentship with fondly? Your accomplishments, what are you most proud of with your time at Life West?
Well, the thing I'm most grateful for is that, starting out in 75 through 81 here with Dr. Williams, we went from 22 students to 1,500 students in that 6-year period. And the order of the day was everybody was responsible for everything at any given moment. I don't care if you're the director of the technique department. Right. I'm going to ask you about the financial report. And I mean, it's the way it was in those days. And as a result, I had this breadth of experience and breadth of exposure going from director of admissions and registrar in 1975 to, division chairman in 1981 that you couldn't replicate, in 4 or 5 careers. Yeah. And then the chance to go to California and do it all over again with all the second guessing I had and if I was Sid, I'd do it this way. I said, well, it's your chance, pal, and you better produce. And so the opportunity to do that and the opportunity to take those first 6 years, to take what we learned there and turn around and apply them again, that's really one of the great joys of my life in that thinking back on the whole opportunity. And in terms of accomplishments, bringing the institution through. When I got there, they had approval from the California Post-Secondary Education Commission to offer the degree, but nothing else. So we had to go from veterans to immigration to CCE to the state board, and one by one to knock off each of those hurdles or to jump over those hurdles to get the institution up to where it needed to be. And then when we went for our first accreditation visit, we had a problem with the finances, and they delayed us for 6 months, and it was a devastating time because we had another institution, Palmer West, was across the bay, and it was very competitive between the two, and there was some licking of the chops, when we had that stumble in the beginning. But things held together, and we came back around, did it again, and everything went fine. And then to bring the institution through the RCA days and then on to the accredited days, that was a personal joy, And then as time went on to become involved more broadly, Sid hated meetings, okay? He had the answers already. He didn't need to hear what you wanted to say or what I wanted to say. And to sit down with a dozen people and talk about what we ought to do, where we ought to go, just put a gun to his head. He just did not want any part of it. So, Clum, you go here. Clum, you go here. Clum, you go here. And, okay, Doc. Okay. And so I wound up, that's how I wound up in the World Federation. That's how I wound up in ICA. That's how I wound up, not so much the Association of Chiropractic Colleges, but all of those things bled into one another and gave me more exposure, more opportunity, and a different level of involvement. And if you think about if I had to give the answer, what's the thing I'm most proud of is that in the mid-90s, most of the students in chiropractic education in the U.S. were funding their education off of a loan called a HEAL loan, Health Education Assistance Loan.
Yep.
And it was like putting your tuition on your MasterCard. In the days of the Carter administration, the interest rates were 18, 19, 20%. And tuition wasn't anywhere near what it is today, but at 20%, it didn't make any difference. It racked up, it doubled every 4 years. And then the HEAL loan, the default rates in the HEAL loan started to go up because it was such an onerous loan to begin with. And the HEAL loan program was brought to an end, and this is funding the majority of the education of chiropractors in the United States. And at the time, I was president of the Association of Chiropractic Colleges. And I was able to work out an agreement with a group out of Hyannis, Massachusetts, run by a fellow by the name of Steve Galvin. And we replaced the HEAL loans with a Chiro loan, a private loan that used Title IV money, as well as private loans. And we were able to bring a product to the table that was able to replace the HEAL loan, to do so at an interest rate that was a fraction of what these students were being charged, and to have dominion and control over the program to a degree on the proprietary side, and then on the federal side of it, obviously they set the tune and we danced to that one. But the number of chiropractic colleges in the United States that were within 6 months of failure because of the inability of students to pay tuition would have taken out half of the profession. And the idea that well, literally, there I'm not going to name the institutions, but there are 2 institutions that were in discussions of bankruptcy that saved the bacon. And I think back, and I think back of those days working with Steve and what it took to get this done, and that really is one of the things I'm most proud of, because very few people understand the impact of what all that meant.
Or even, they're not even aware of those things happening in the background that were so impactful in the profession, But to know that and to appreciate that, sitting around the fireplace with my feet up and a glass of wine, we did pretty damn good. Absolutely.
Did pretty damn good.
Absolutely.
And so I'm very grateful for that exposure and that opportunity. And then involvement with the World Federation turned into something that I had great fondness for and appreciation for. I sat on the executive council there on the board for 28 years and was in leadership and went through the chairs toward the end of that time. And that really was very important for me personally, is to begin to have an interface for Life and Life West between the larger international community. That Sid was very gregarious and outreaching and wanting to have an international impact. But this gave us a more structured, organized ability to function within the framework around the world, that we weren't interlopers coming in. We were participants and contributing to the greater good as the profession developed around the world through the WFC and my role with Life and Life West. So that's also another area that when I went on the WFC, the vote was 16-1. And whatever Clum was for, nay. And when I eventually stayed on there and apparently earned my stripes with them, eventually elected into the presidency, and I'm very grateful for all of that.
Yeah, these 16-1 votes are interesting because, when you were on the ACC, there were some pretty strong personalities around that table. And the votes often went that way as well. But, some remarkable things came out of those days as a collective group of presidents of organizations with very different views of the profession. You were around during the days of the 96 paradigm,
ACC
absolutely. Paradigm.
I was in the thick of that, and those discussions, and that was a remarkable experience. That went on for several years. The process of developing the paradigm statements that were published in 1995.
Which, by the way, for those who don't know about the chiropractic paradigm of the ACC, it was a pretty powerful document. And if I'm not mistaken, it was the only time in ACC history up till then that all presidents actually agreed and signed something collectively. Is that true?
I don't think I'm wrong when I say up to and since.
Since,
yeah. Yes. And I mean, that was the situation. You had Sid and Dr. Gilardi on one end.
Mm-hmm.
You had Reed Phillips and Jim Winterstein on the other end. And, finding a common ground, finding the language to get to a common ground, really was a tremendous experience to go through. And there were some shocking moments along the way. One in particular, I think you'll appreciate this with your coming from Canada. We were in a heck of a battle, and I forgot what the issue was. But it came up that Dr. Williams had advocated something, and Jim Winterstein thought it was terrible and criticized it very strongly and professionally and appropriately. I don't mean to say he was rude about it, but he got his position be known. And the observation was made that by one of the facilitators, said, "It seems to me that it doesn't matter who's right, it matters who says it around this table." Well, Jim went through the roof. He went ballistic. And Sid sitting there kind of like saying, well, I've been saying that for 20 years.
Yeah.
And out of the blue, Gene Moss pops up and says,
CMCC president for years.
President of CMCC at the time, and says, that's exactly right. That's exactly what's going on here. And it changed the tide.
Yeah, that would have been a big input into that conversation.
It turned the tide. And Jim didn't change his position, but it became less personal. And he realized that the things were being filtered through a lens of who said it rather than what was being said. And when we started getting down to what was being said as opposed to whose thought it was, it got better.
Yeah. We still suffer from that problem in the profession.
Oh, absolutely.
In all of our big reaching conversations as we relate to the implication of our philosophy of our profession as it relates to the application in our science and technique. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the elements that create that haven't gone away.
Right.
And we might get a moment of clarity and a moment of relief from it where something good can happen, but, we go right back to it, Unfortunately, it's just human nature.
Yeah. You've talked about WFC, for disclosure purposes, for those listening, Life University in 2019 pulled out of our sponsorship of WFC at the time for various reasons. And since then, we've been on the sideline watching that. But you gave a talk. Oh, your talk you gave at, I think it was Parker seminar on separate and distinct versus isolated and alone.
Yes.
Which I think is still to this day one of the best talks I've heard that's pertinent to the conversation we have in our profession. So when it comes to WFC, there's critics who are taking the isolated and alone position. And then there's people who think you can still maintain separate and distinct but work parallel to conventional healthcare. Speak to, from your perspective, the importance of the separate and distinct but parallel as opposed to isolated and alone, because clearly serving on the board of WFC is a collaborative process.
Yes, exactly.
So your thoughts on that, because obviously you've suffered the slings and arrows of a lot of critics on this topic for your years of service.
I was a bad guy in some circles and in the eyes of some very good friends, which is unfortunate. But I think, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because 2019 was an embarrassment for the WFC in a program they had in Germany, in Berlin, and I wholeheartedly supported the actions of Life University. And I'm talking about 28 years of sitting on that board of the WFC. I had some investment there. But I wholeheartedly support and understand Life making the decision it made and why it made it, and was in full and complete agreement with it. That being said, I think the issue for me is that are you going to be, we can be apart from the discussion and think and aggrandize ourselves to the point where we think we can have just as much effect as a lone entity out there, or we can see the value that you talked about today, that if we're going to go anyplace, we'll go farther if we go together. So I've tried to take the standpoint that when I've talked and people in the profession, and whether it's political stuff or whether philosophic stuff and so on, one of the first questions I ask myself is, what am I saying that's so offensive and irritating to him or to her, and causing this reaction? And that, is there a way that I can say it, and an approach I can take to it where I can say the same thing but not draw that reaction? And that's what I sought to do in my language and in my behavior, and how things moved from there. And in the same way, the isolated and alone discussion, we can take our ball and bat and go home and do what we want to do, and we can continue to carve out our own little niche in the deal. Or we can understand that, we're dealing with very different cultures around the world. We're dealing with very different systems of healthcare delivery and healthcare definition, and that the American model isn't necessarily going to be the universal model. It might not even be the best model. It's the one we deal with, and that the idea that the more I understand about those cultures, the more I understand about the framework of thought that goes into that, the better off I'm going to be trying to understand them and what they're doing. And that's what I got out of that whole discussion. So when we talk about being isolated or alone, we can convince ourselves that we're the be-all and the end-all, and we don't need anything else, and rah-rah, and beat our chest and head down the road. Mm-hmm. Or we can, this is going to sound very pejorative and judgmental, and I'll say it anyway, we can grow up and understand that we're, like it or not, we're part of a larger community in a larger context, and that unless we embrace and engage that, we're never going to influence it. And the only time that I've ever found to have any influence in another circle is when I respect that circle to begin with. I may not agree with it, I may not like it, I may be violently opposed to it, but you've got the right to that view, you've got the right to that opinion, and I'm not disagreeing with that.
Right.
I see it differently, and this is why I see it differently.
Yeah.
And try and reason from that standpoint. So, the isolationism situation, I don't see that ever got us very far.
It's a strategy question.
Oh, absolutely.
Fundamentally, that's the part. Is this strategy better than this strategy? And I don't know if we know the answer to either of those questions yet. There's fair game in challenging the issues that go into the strategies. But we never looked at it as a strategy. We looked at it, it was a knee-jerk that preceded strategy. Mm-hmm. And it was a visceral response that we went to before there was any question of strategy. Mm-hmm. Is this good for us? Is this bad for us? Is there aspects of this I don't understand? Boom, right out of the gate. Boom, bad, done, so on. And so you're absolutely right. The strategy became one of evaluating it. Looking at it, engaging, talking to people about it. Mm-hmm. My God, what a concept. Mm-hmm. And then, seeing what we can learn. And, there was, I used to tell the story about, with Sid. He said, Clum, you tell that son of a bitch such. And I'd say, Dr. Scott, I had a conversation with Dr. Williams, and he was very interested in your maternal heritage. Yeah, your ability to translate the conversation.
And in certain circles it worked.
Yeah.
In other circles I continued to be the SOB.
But I think that speaks to whether you like WFC or these organizations or their activities. I'm going to say straight up, I can't think of anybody in the profession who has a better reputation as a professional diplomat, as a spokesperson, crossing conversational barriers than you, Jerry. So
that's very kind.
I appreciate all those years of translating the message into something that people will find more palatable.
Yeah, and it's, I think I mean, if the people that have, aside from the decisions of 2019 and the problems with the WFC, which appear to be past, frankly, at this point, or getting better, moving in the right direction, and that the when you really read the documents, forget the personality. Forget the David Chapman Smiths, forget the Lou Sportelli history of it, forget the Gerard Clum history of it. Read the documents. What does it say? There's very little in there for us as life chiropractors to be upset about or angry about.
The devil's in the details, right?
Devil's in the details.
Interpretation.
And, the reason we show up and the reason you participate is because those that do get to play the cards. Doesn't change the cards, but to get to play them.
Absolutely.
And how you play them determines whether you win the game or not.
Yeah. That game thing, it's just a game.
Just a game.
Yeah.
Just a game.
So let's bring you a little closer recent history. 2011.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Ekman gives you a call, says you'd like to come back to Life University as presidential liaison. And multiple tasks, obviously running the Octagon conferences that we had back in those days. And taking over the leadership of the Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics. Talk about that experience, because that's one of life's projects that I don't think a lot of people really know about, but man, is it impactful.
That's a shame. That's a shame. I was relatively young for somebody to be retired when I left Life West. I wasn't in an economic position or a personal position or professional position to stop working, and so. But I didn't know what Plan B was going to be, and I was pretty nervous there. I knew I was done at Life West. 30 years, I was fully cooked. I wasn't mad at anybody. I don't think they were mad at me. Things were going along, but I was just done. And so when Dr. Ekman approached me, I was very intrigued. I went through a period of, I was Life West for 30 years. Now I'm back at Life University. You got this schizophrenia going on. What do you started out at Life, you're coming back to Life, no schizophrenia.
Coming home.
Coming home, exactly. And that's exactly how it feels this weekend. And so I welcomed that opportunity, and it was really a blank slate that Dr. Ekman gave me and said, let's create things. And he had ideas, obviously. And different things to follow. But, you've mentioned the Octagon conferences, and they were very important in terms of the generation of a number of current projects that the university has, including the Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics, and the Shalom Project.
That spun from that.
Which did, yes. And in thinking about the second part answer to the greatest accomplishments for me, after the HEAL loan discussion and the Chiro loan replacement, the Shalom Project is the second on that list. I remember the first day I was at the prison, and this is a maximum security prison with 1,500 women, and I had never met a murderer, let alone sat down in a room with 7 or 8 of them. I had never been in a prison. I had never been to a prison. And I went in wide-eyed.
It's an intimidating experience to walk through those gates.
It is. And you talk about the gate clanging behind you. The idea that there was no going home after this was a holy mackerel moment. And I remember being in there, and then I started to hear the conversation, and I was stunned. The brilliance, the concepts, the ideas that were coming out of these women's mouths were just breathtaking. They didn't sound like you and I talk.
Totally agree.
It was pretty rough around the edges. But if you saw past the language and you got to the idea that it was trying to put forward, it was staggering. And then I remember going back, the second time I was back, they were so proud to be part of Life University. We walked into this little classroom, probably not much bigger than this room that we're in right now, and it had Life banners up. And
It's remarkable.
And I'm saying, and they would have crawled over ground glass to make it to class. And the idea that one of them would come to class without their work being done was abhorrent. And they wouldn't let you or me as a member of that class not show up prepared.
Right. Accountability.
The accountability was through the roof, and it was inmate to inmate in your face accountability. I mean, it was like, we're not being polite about this. It was smack dab right in the face, but it was effective, and it was powerful. And I left thinking, like, I don't ever want to go back into a classroom where I've got to talk some kid into coming to class because he's got to make attendance to get. I said, these women would knock you flat on your behind if you got the way of getting them getting to class. And like, oh man, that's where I want to teach. And I know to this day that anybody who went up to Herondale, thank you, and taught, a classroom was never the same. A classroom back home was never the same. And the thirst and the hunger that was there, that has only grown, only expanded, and I think in the long run, the Shalon Project is really what ultimately I'll say was probably the most important thing I ever did.
Yeah,
as a chiropractor.
And people won't appreciate that, I don't think, because they haven't experienced both the emotional impact of what's being done in the prison. I felt the exact same way.
Yeah.
I mean, Lord knows how many degrees you've conferred over 30 years as a president. I've conferred thousands myself.
Yes.
And the first time we did a graduation inside the prison walls with the first cohort, I couldn't even get through the conferring of the degree piece without being in tears. It was such an impactful moment on those students. And of course, our challenge is how do we take that to make it more impactful throughout, the correctional facilities here in Georgia, of course, but even nationally is the challenge for us. So I appreciate everything you've done there. It's a truly remarkable accomplishment as well that is getting a lot of attention nationally.
Yeah.
So
and it and I remember explaining to people what we were doing, and it was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're a chiropractor.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And it really opened my eyes. The inequity of the criminal justice system. I don't want to get political, and I want to cause anybody to get their fur up on this. But the inequity and the injustice of the criminal justice system is so in your face when you're in that environment.
Yeah.
That it's awful. It's just plain awful.
Yeah, it's time to take a good hard look at that.
And when you realize what's different about women in prison is that when a woman goes to prison, the family goes to prison. When a man goes to jail, a man goes to jail. When a woman's in prison, the whole entire family's in prison. Mm-hmm. And when the woman's in college in the prison, the entire family's in college. And the implications of that to generations of children
families
that never saw the inside of that prison, who will benefit because of what mom or their Aunt Bessie or Aunt Sally went through, is just staggering. Yeah. Just staggering.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to touch our communities in different ways than just chiropractic.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And Sid used to talk about one of our goals was to bank up the hospitals, empty the jails, and fill up the churches.
Right. I
don't think he ever envisioned us emptying the jail this way. But it's a pretty damn good.
Seems to be working.
Good approach. And I've thought about that so many times that I'd like to give him credit and say those thoughts were so prophetic, and he had this in his mind down the road. I don't know if he did or not.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful that
I don't think he would mind.
I don't think he'd mind one iota.
What's wonderful about Life now, Life University, as we move forward, of course, is taking our principles, our values of lasting purpose, and expanding our reach. I mean, there's still the chiropractic principles. They're just being applied in different ways, and such a wonderful opportunity for the institution.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, one last question maybe.
Okay.
So looking forward with the 40 plus years of experience in the profession and the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us as a profession, what's your hopes for chiropractic in the years to come?
Well,
with grandchildren in Life University right now.
That's right.
Kids as chiropractors, what do you hope for them and their families as far as our profession is concerned?
Well, I it's funny you should ask about that, because in dealing with my grandchildren that are here, I listen for them about the things that are important to them and the things that are they're concerned about as our granddaughter in particular looking at entering the profession, and I don't hear the anger and the angst that I had, and the effect of the oppression of the AMA days and the the things that the Wilk suit sought to rectify, and so there's an opportunity that they don't have to go through that. They need to be aware of it, need to learn about it, have knowledge of it, but they don't have to go through those same kinds of problems. And as a result, they can become more mature sooner. And what I think is happening across the globe in healthcare is that as the ecology movement moves forward and we realize the frailty of the planet, we realize the frailty of the systems that support the planet, we're translating that very slowly as a culture into realizing the frailties of us as humans and the weaknesses that we have and what's necessary to maintain a balance in the system and in the world. And we can just look at the pandemic that we've had, the effect of the virus and so on. The awareness that of how you live your life today is going to determine the quality of life tomorrow is different than it was when I was a kid. I grew up in the Better Living Through Chemistry days. I can remember, magazine ads with the medical doctor talking about these Camel cigarettes are preferred by more physicians than any other.
Right. How times change.
I mean, it's whiplashing in terms of that. But what's happening is that we're starting to see these thoughts and these perspectives move into the culture, and the culture is looking for a framework to put them to work. And what I see Life University, and I'd like to think Life West doing the same, is coming along and giving, as part of that framework, giving them a pattern and a method and an approach to follow relative to healthcare. That there was a time when I thought there really wasn't much of a need for emergency rooms and obstetricians and things like that. We could take care of it all. Well, I've gotten dispossessed of that perspective and gotten a more realistic perspective on things as I walk around on artificial knees and had a number of joints replaced. It humbles you and you learn a lot. But my point is that the society is looking for a vehicle to begin to translate all of the things that we're seeing around us relative to ecology and the health and well-being of the planet to the health and well-being of the individual. And when the COVID thing hit, we got, if you got this problem, you're going to get worse. If you got overweight, you're going to get worse. If you're this, you're going to get worse, and so on. Well, why don't we pay attention to changing those things that are going to make us worse? And maybe we'll get better all over. And so we're taking this completely different approach. While the mainstream has gotten enamored with the vaccine side of the thing, there's another quiet river of change that's going on. That not in contradiction to or disagreement with, but whether you want it or not, are things that we can do, and should approach to try and improve the quality of life that we have now, the relationship that we have with the planet down the road in terms of the antibiotics we're throwing into the water system, to you name it. And, so I see those things, that ferment changing, and you and I come along at a time that if we can come up with the right strategy, as you said before, and the right words, we can begin to have our message heard like it's never been heard before. And that the opportunity for a finely crafted argument at this moment in time, in the age of the internet and the age of social media, we can go farther and faster than we ever could have dreamed of before, or we can stunt our growth faster and quicker than we've ever conceived of before,
right,
by how we behave. And so my goal is always been to try and ask better questions. And I think as a population, we're asking better questions now. And I think part of what you and I do and what we've been concerned about is giving a better answer for the question that comes up regarding health and well-being.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your time, Dr. Clum.
Oh, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed it.
I'm glad you were willing to take an opportunity to sit down here in our beautiful new video podcast studio.
Congratulations.
And be here for this weekend. And I guess on behalf of the entire LIFE community, I want to just thank you for being a part of our family and your contributions in the past, present, and what you will continue to do for us professionally in the future, Jerry.
You. Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to work with you and with Life University. And we didn't touch on it much, but I'm also very grateful to IHPC for the honor of the Legacy Award that you introduced us with. And I said a few minutes ago I was humbled by it, and I really am. I'm grateful for it, and I appreciate it very much. And I'm humbled by it all. So
just for those who might be interested, is that lecture is going to be given tomorrow?
Yes.
By a good friend of yours. Dr. Leonard Wisneski.
Yes.
Happens to be a medical doctor, but is a longtime board member of IHPC and Integrative Care. And that video is recorded and will be posted to the IHPC website, I think, in the future, if people are interested in being able to see that. And, of course, it'll be on our LIFE YouTube channel as well.
Len was the founder of IHPC. And one of the things, I don't know if you're aware of this, but remember when Ronald Reagan was shot? And he was taken to the hospital in Washington?
Yeah.
Well, one of the emergency room physicians was on duty that day was Leonard Wisneski.
Oh, I did not know that.
And the guy Reagan wanted to know if he was a Republican was Len.
Well, that's a great way to wrap up. I'm going to use that in the introduction tomorrow for this. I appreciate it. I look forward to kicking off the inaugural Gerard Clum Lasting Purpose Legacy Lectureship.
Thank you, my friend.
Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Love and appreciate you.
Love you, buddy.
Thank you.
Thank you.